This was the team that was there on site in Minneapolis. With us today is Jen Lampton, training director of Chapter 3. Boyan Summers, who's Drupal's UX team lead, and he's also an interaction designer freelance. Brad Bowman, and he is a principal at Bitnik. And then myself, I am with Acquia as a director of community development. So what were we up to? Pretty much just being silly in a room for 3 days. But basically, we perform these usability evaluations. So how this works is we recruit, between 5 and 8 people within a given target audience. And the target audience we asked for was web developers who knew other platforms but did not know Drupal. And so just about everybody was someone who knew HTML and had worked with WordPress before and stuff like that, but they hadn't actually used Drupal before. So these are people directly in our target audience. And what we do is we give them a set of tasks. And so some of the tasks we asked them to do were things like, create a piece of content, add it to a menu, create a block and move it into the sidebar. But of course, when you say the task, you can't use those sort of words. You have to, say things that are real words and then have them pick out in the interface where you actually need to do that. And then we observed what they did, and we all kind of groaned and went, "Oh no!" And then we took notes and stuff like that. And one other thing that was interesting is we had a help desk. So that if people got totally stuck, they could call, and then one of us would answer the phone. We sort of traded off who got to do this, and we got to say, "Oh, well, have you tried looking under this thing?" And kind of give them a little push the next day. The methodology that was employed is called thinking out loud. So instead of having a usability evaluator in the room with them, the way we would do it is we would all sit behind one-way glass, so they couldn't see us. They knew we were there. But they couldn't see us, and then there was one facilitator who kind of filtered in and out of the room when they seemed like they were stuck, just to kind of ask them a little bit of what they were doing. And then as they were clicking around, we asked them to sort of verbalize what they were thinking. So, for example, if they go to create a piece of content, they'd be like, "Well, it looks like this is the admin bar up here, so I'm going to click Add Content, see what that does." So try to verbalize their thought process. Why do we do this for Drupal? We do it for Drupal because we really want Drupal to be usable for everybody. Our eventual goal is to make it easy enough for people who are non-technical to use, but what we found the last time we did this is we're losing our primary target audience, which is technical people who can't even figure Drupal out. So we're starting there, trying to figure out how we can make it easier for them, and sort of working on that. So the goals of this study was to validate the solutions to previous issues. We also wanted to start early because Drupal 8 is just kicking off development right now. A lot of people get really scared when they hear that, like, "God, I'm still on Drupal 6. Why are you doing that?" Or Drupal 5 even, which is sad. But we need to do that because Drupal 7 took 3 years to develop, you know what I mean? So we need to start early so that by the time Drupal 8 really kicks off and ready to go, we have a lot of this stuff done. So it's great to do this really early in the process because Drupal 7 just came out in January. So we're really starting this very early so we have time to sort of make adjustments as needed. This is a big, dense slide, don't worry about it, but basically what I was saying before, our participants were site builders. They're all people who had web development experience but no Drupal experience. And basically they were given time to explore the CMS before they actually did any tasks. We got to get some of their first impressions and that sort of stuff. Here were the tasks. Create an About Us page accessible from the header navigation. 2 was change the background from blue to a different color. 3 was create a text block, meaning like a sidebar thing. 4 was install the web form module. 5 was create a custom content type, and 6 was enable images on the new content type. So these are all things that Drupal people do all the time, right? This is part of the day-to-day stuff that we do when we do Drupal.
Is it cool to have them do this from all the front interface?
What's that?
The front end interface? They don't have any back end?
Yes. Yeah, it was all from the, all from the user interface. They were basically all given Drupal sandbox sites that were pre-installed, and then they were asked to do these tasks in that context. So before we get into the reusability results of this test, Brad would like to talk to you a little bit about some of our tests from the results from the previous test. So take it away, Brad.
So yeah, as Angie said, we've done testing a couple times in the past, and when we were testing at the University of Minnesota, we're not just testing new things in Drupal 7, we're also testing whether fixes to old things work. So I'm just going to walk through some of the things that we found out when we were testing Drupal 6 and Drupal 7 early in its development, and just give an idea of what the sort of the historical perspective was and what issues we knew coming into it. And I should also stress that the things I'm going to go through are not an exhaustive list of the problems by any stretch of the imagination. There's some of the major ones that we found, but it's, you know, by no stretch of the imagination an exhaustive list. So the first problem that was pretty big for people is the create content screen. People were pretty unclear about several things on this. The first was page content type. People had the idea that the page was the entire content area that you were seeing, not just, you know, in Drupal a page is this tiny little chunk of content that's displayed and has all these things wrapped around it that are not a part of the page. But people
like the blocks and the
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
There's you know, there's not only page, there's node content that goes into a page, but you have blocks and you have, you know, custom theming and all of that stuff that's kind of around it. You have your menus, but people had the perception that page was all of that. The other thing is story. People really didn't know what to make of story. One big problem that people had is they thought it was like a multi-page thing. So you would create, you know, a story and you'd be able to flip through pages, which is, you know, natural for the term story. And they, actually let me jump back. One other thing is the difference between them was, it was pretty unclear as well. People just kind of saw that page and they were like, well, which one do I choose? And it would just kind of cause them to lock up and read text, and the help text is not incredibly helpful there either. We did that. So. Secondarily, if they actually got to creating content, there's a couple key issues with this page. First of all, the prominence of the menu settings and the split summary at cursor led people to believe that they were always going to have to select those options. Has anybody ever used in Drupal 6 the split summary at cursor button? Yeah, I'm sorry. It's bad. Basically, if you hit that button, it divides the body in half. And the first part of it is supposed to be your teaser content, and the second part of it is supposed to be the main body content. But nobody, I mean, there's no instructions, nobody really gets that. You just hit that button, and you would find people, they just click back and forth, and you're like, whoa. I think people were impressed with it, but nobody knew how to use it, which is kind of a problem. The second is, again, menu settings is just really prominent there, so you cause people to like look at that, and you know, if they hadn't put menu items in Drupal before, it's a pretty confusing thing, which we'll get to in a minute. The other issue with this page is the collapsible field sets. You kind of saw two main problems with this. One is that they're links, so a lot of people didn't want to click on them. Because they thought if they clicked on them, they'd be clicking away from the page and they'd lose all their edits. The other pattern you saw is people that did understand the interaction method there, that you click on it and it expands and you see more options, and then they proceeded to go through every single item to see what was under it all. And neither of those are obviously the way we want to steer people, so. So back to menus. As you, before, on the last page, like the menu settings was a really prominent area of that page. So we're like kind of driving people to click into that, and then we present them with this, which this is the entire menu structure for all of Drupal. You see things like, you know, all of the menu items that modules put under the admin section in here that you can go in and parent. There are maybe a couple cases where you would want to do that, but 99.9% of the time, you just want the stuff in main menu and maybe navigation in there, and you're not interested in anything else. So I think there's, like, by default in Drupal, there's like 75 or 80 options probably in this dropdown. So we're steering people to use this, and then we're presenting that to them, which is a problem. Another big issue, the difference between admin and front-end separation. This is a screen in Drupal 6 that you would see right after you install Drupal. So we give you this huge wall of text that's not, I mean, first of all, people don't read text in the interface, unfortunately, for better or worse. But we present you all this stuff, so people would just sit there and kind of, you know, for 2 or 3 minutes, they'd read every single thing. And then we've taught them that if you want to configure your website, you find the link in here. If you want to enable additional functionality, you also click the link in there. So eventually they create a page. And the minute you create a page, this screen goes away, never to be seen or found again. So we're teaching them that this is where you go to do things because we're putting all these links here, and then we just take it away from them as soon as they learn to use it. So, this is the admin page. Can anybody? I mean, at first glance, looks pretty similar, doesn't it? But yeah, the issue that we had here is that it's just overwhelming. We, there's not. Sure, we have like areas for content management and site building and all that, but it's not really. People will click on this if they've never seen this page, and if they're not a Drupal developer, the number of options here are pretty overwhelming. And there's a lot of things that even as a site builder, you're gonna do really infrequently, like post settings. Do you really need that above the fold on the page that you click into in the admin? Like, you might go change those settings occasionally, but it's not a common use case. So we were just sort of overwhelming people with the number of options here, and again, it's one of those things where people would see the screen and just kind of block up. The last issue, I believe, is we refer to this as which is pages that don't have parents, is basically our thinking there. Going back to the menu issue, first of all, we teach people to use that menu, and then we present them with an overwhelming number of options. So they get scared and don't select anything and save their content. And as soon as they've done that, if you don't put it in the menu, it's really hard to find your content in Drupal. It's not linked anywhere. If you go back here as a new user, the only way you're going to get to that is to click into admin and then click content and find your content listing. And people would literally create nodes like 3 or 4 times and think it was just lost every single time. So that's pretty much all, well, not all, but that's sort of the key issues in Drupal 6, and I think Angie's going to talk about how they fixed it in 7. So.
Yeah. So those are all the So those are all the problems that we hit in Drupal 6, right? And it was shocking because we thought we were going to test. Oh, I wonder how taxonomy fares with new developers, and we were like, they can't even figure out how to get to content. Oh my God, this is horrible. So this was kind of some of the stuff that we tried to do. So the first thing you notice when you install Drupal 7 is it looks very starkly different than it did before. For one thing, we have this administrative toolbar up at the top. So all of the frequently accessed administration tasks are right there, one click away. We also organize this by task as opposed to by category. The old IA had things under site building, content management, user management, things like that. Here we go by what's the context in which you're working in your site. Well, I'm managing content. I'm going to go here. I want to change my appearance, so I'll go over there. I'm configuring my site, so I'll go over there. So we tried to break up the IA more towards like certain areas of the, when you're thinking about your site, how you do it. We also added this pattern called contextual links, because a big problem is like if you want to change the text of that block on the page over there, the way you do that is you go to administer site building blocks, and then you find the block on the list, you click configure, and take a bunch of stuff, and you click save. And by the time you've done that, you have no idea what you were doing when you saw that typo, and then you have to kind of get back to it. So here, if you see a typo in this block, you just hover over it, click here, go right to configure block without having to trawl through the admin interface. So,
nice.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. We also made this this new front end theme, so pretty. It's called Parse. We also made a bunch of back end changes. So when you click add content, what you get is you get this overlay, which immediately is a visual indicator that's like, whoa, I'm not on my front end anymore. Now I'm in an administrative context. We also have an admin theme. So this theme is called 7. Which is just like bare bones, white background, blue links. That's it. So that it's very clear when you're in an admin context and when you're on the front end context. And one of the big questions people had is this what I'm seeing or is this what my users are seeing? And so this is trying to make that a little bit more explicit for people. We changed the name of story to article, and we changed the name of page to basic page, so that it was clear to people. Like for one thing, nobody knew what a story was, but article is pretty clear. Article is a pretty clear concept. We also added a bunch of things to article to make it visually very distinct from page, because in Drupal 6 page and story, the only difference between the two is that after you click save, one of them has the author date information at the top and is promoted on the front page, and the other one isn't. But otherwise, the forms look identical. There's no difference visually. So this one, we added tags, we added an image field, stuff like that, to try and say, this is an article, it's different from a page. We also added tags, which is important because, you know, taxonomy is kind of a weird concept for people. So tags shipping out of the box in the default profile is really nice because, you know, we have at least one working example of how that goes, and people seem to understand how that works. The teaser splitter we got rid of. We changed to a nice little edit summary link, which most people didn't even see, and that's fine. Because it's there if you need it, and if you don't, it's not visually distracting you from your actual task that you're trying to do. And then the last thing we did is all those collapsed field sets. We moved it to a pattern, called vertical tabs. And so the vertical tabs pattern basically not only gives you the actual name of the thing, but it also tells you what it's currently set to. So you don't have to open up all of the options to see what everything is set to. You can just visually look and see that that's how things are working. So those were some of the changes that we made, some of the big changes. How did that fare in our testing? So I'll start with some positives. So the good news is that most of the implemented changes appear to have been very effective. We did not see people getting stuck on the same stuff they were stuck on in the Drupal 6 testing, so that was huge. You know, for adding content, people knew how to get to content. People said that was simple, that was straightforward. We actually have 18 links to get you to add content, so you know, it's no longer hard to find where to do that. People could find it really easily. And yeah, people could create About Us pages. It was not a problem. The exception was some people come to Drupal with a structure-first mindset. So, you know, and I came from I used to build my own websites from hand in Notepad, dang it. And yeah, you would totally do that, right? You'd make okay, I wanted about ... and you kind of structure your navigation and things like that. So people came in that way, got really lost, because if you go to the menu page, it asks you, the first thing it asks you for is, what's a path? And you're like, what's up? I don't know, you know, because you haven't created any content yet. So that was an issue. But for the most part, that task was totally easy. People really understood the difference between article and basic page. They immediately knew that was what they wanted to click for an About Us page. They got the difference between article. Nobody voiced any confusion about those at all. So that was great.
Is article used more like a blog?
Yeah, basically. Yep. They also were able to edit colors. These are some of the color schemes that they chose, which is very colorful. This one was a lot of fun because the eye tracker is red, so we couldn't actually see where they were looking at. But people found that color wheel, and they were able to deal with it because they went immediately to appearance. Before, they would have to have found themes under site building in order to get there, and they struggled with that a lot the first time around. Let's see. Oh, I just said that. Sorry. Yes, appearance, easy to find. This was some of the contents they had. Oh, cool, you know. One thing that was interesting is, so the color module has this little preview window. And it's nice, it's like an interactive preview. So if you hover over these links, they'll sort of turn to a different color and stuff like that. People loved that. The problem was they expected to see that everywhere. And this is the only place we really do that. So when you preview a node, for example, it doesn't show up like this. And when you preview where your block is going to show up, it doesn't look like this. So people were frustrated because they really wanted to see this absolutely everywhere they went. The overlay and toolbar tested well. Everyone was able to find that immediately. So it wasn't a struggle for them to get to their administration options at all. And almost everybody had a really clear idea of how to toggle in and out of this thing. Some people struggled a little bit. They thought you had to click the X every time you did anything. So how it works is as soon as you go into the admin interface, this thing comes up. And you can just click around the admin interface and it's fine. But some people thought you had to click here, close it, click here, close it, until they kind of got used to it for a little while. So first impressions, like I mentioned, we let them sort of tool around in Drupal for a little while and see what they thought, just for a couple of minutes. So some of their first impressions were that it's very simple. It's clearly laid out. There's a lot you can do, and it's not very cluttered, which is hilarious. They were new, you know. But yeah, I mean, so this is the good news is that was not the first impression of Drupal at all in the old testing. The first impression was Drupal was I'm overwhelmed. I don't know where to find anything. This is crazy. So that was really, really good. However, there were some things that didn't test so well, and Jen is going to talk to you a little bit about that.
So the first problem that we ran into
Drupalisms, right? There's a lot of words that we use in Drupal that people outside of Drupal don't understand. Something like dashboard, people expect it to be a single place they could go to control everything on their site, or at least get a summary of what was going on, and people clicked there and found that there was actually nothing there at all. A couple people went back there a couple times thinking that after they'd done stuff, new things might have appeared, but they didn't. Structure, also people often thought that had more to do with different parts of their site, like their layout, than what we actually intended it for. And there were other words like modules where people thought either they came in with preconceived notions of what that meant. Some other content management systems use modules to mean the same thing that we call blocks, and some people had no idea what it was at all. And if you present people with a word that they don't understand, their eyes just go right over it. It's like they don't even think, I wonder what that is. It's just invisible to them. So that was kind of an interesting thing. We had a bunch of terminology in there that means something if you know what it means, and if you don't, it was really flustering to the point where it blocked people from preventing tasks. So in themes, for example, default theme, nobody really knew what that meant, and Bartik, as its name, was also not an indicator of what people were actually looking at. 7, same thing, people kind of understood, okay, well this has something to do with administration, but they didn't get that 7 had some relation to one theme and Bartik had a relation to another, so that was kind of hard for people. And then, for example, when people were trying to choose places to put blocks, they opened up the list of regions and saw a bunch of regions that didn't make any sense to them without seeing our layout designer first. And when they came across things like triptych, people didn't know how to say it, didn't understand what it meant, and it sometimes got to the point where their brains would just freeze, and they're like, trick, and then they didn't know what to do. So that was kind of an interesting phenomenon to watch. When people were questioned about what they thought a module was afterwards, we got a lot of really interesting responses, particularly people who hadn't even bothered to look at that nav item, just skipped right over it. We're like, what do you think that means? And they were like, I have no idea. We also had some issues with terminology, things that people in Drupal use all the time, like, oh, I'm going to edit my menu. I guess I'll click this link that says list links instead of the link that says edit menu. People who actually wanted to edit their menu clicked edit menu and then got really confused that there wasn't any way to edit their menu and under that. Also, when people looked at navigation on a wireframe and wanted to add a link to it, they would come to this page and they would see main menu, which was the first one that they were supposed to click on, and not know what it meant. But they saw something that said navigation, and they were like, oh, I'm obviously adding a navigation link, and went straight into navigation to change that. But in Drupal 7, navigation is actually not really navigation at all anymore. It's just links for users. So that was also troublesome. This is one of the wireframes that we presented with our users, and we basically pointed to the area on the side of the page and said, we want you to create something like that. So we weren't using the word block. We weren't trying to give them any hints about what they should be doing in Drupal, but said, put this on the side over there. And every single person, since they were so happy with finding those create content links all over their site, all are like, oh, content, and went straight to create content. Lots of different ways to create content now. So that was kind of an interesting thing where we hadn't really considered blocks as content before that, and now every single person who's testing thought that was what they were supposed to do. After they realized that they'd created a page or an article or something else and got it to appear in the middle, we said, no, we want it on the side. And a lot of people tried to go into the settings for their existing piece of content and look for a way to move it. Some of them even tried to grab it and drag and drop visually into a new location on the page, which was something that was also not what we would do, but interesting to see.
Right, so Andy was talking about this a little bit, but when people are kind of using Drupal, they're building sites, they're very orientated on the end result, so what shows up in the front end. And within Drupal, we don't really accommodate well for this model, other than, for example, where we have the preview for the colors. And yeah, it's a problem that we saw throughout the testing. And as Jen mentioned, when you see these menu options, you don't actually know where they're going unless you have done some experimenting with it. And this often led to them taking the wrong one, or just being plain confused about what's this about, and why is there no preview that I know where this menu is. To show a quick video about a user that gets to the blog page and tries to add a block, and then is kind of confused where the block goes.
Let's see, I'm pretty sure Bartik in 7. I think I was on Bartik. Okay. Sidebar. Oh my god. Highlighted. Okay, I don't want it to be featured because I'm pretty sure that's like the welcome block. So, chips, yeah. Okay, I don't want it to be footer. I'm pretty sure it's sidebar, the first thing on the sidebar. So, oh my goodness. Which one am I on? 7 with Bartik?
It's a learning curve.
Oh my gosh, okay.
It's a
Well,
learning
Cliff.
Cliff.
I should preview what I'm doing. There should be a little preview button.
So stressful.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's like the best way to totally ruin your entire week. It's just like,
That's great.
So one of the things that's interesting there is that people were also, they were not confident about their choices. The system didn't really help them in making confident choices. So we saw there was kind of like a gap, right? Like between the thing that you're working on and what you're basically working in. And when people see the administrative interface and work with the options, they don't always, or actually quite often don't know how it relates to the front end. And we have some tools to bridge this gap. For example, within the blocks page, we have a blocks demonstration that kind of helps to fill that gap. But you need to go there before you create a block to know that where the blocks are. And we don't really have these kind of demonstration tools or preview tools for other systems, like for example menus. We don't have a preview to see where your menu ends up. And for example, when you're creating content, you can now, you can create a menu item, and when people click preview, they kind of want to see where the menu item goes. And there's no such thing. Did we just overheat?
Yeah.
It
Oh,
goes out.
If you unplug it and plug it back in.
Actually, there's somewhere on that panel over there is a switch to reset the projector. It turns off by itself after about 2 hours.
Oh.
Takes a minute to reset though.
That actually happened to several.
anybody know any good jokes?
A man's walking down the man is driving down the highway and out runs a rabbit and he hits it. He gets out of his car, he sees the rabbit's dead, he's all upset, he's pacing around. A woman's driving by, she sees something's wrong. She gets out of her car, what's wrong, what's wrong? He says, I got this little bunny rabbit, I love little animals. And then she says, hang on, I got just the thing. She goes back to the trunk of her car, she gets out a can, she shakes it up and she comes back to him and the rabbit and she sprays it all over the rabbit. They stand there for a minute watching him. Suddenly he jumps up and he waves at both of them and he hops up the roadways and he waves again. The man's jaw is on the ground, he can't believe it. He watches the rabbit hopping, stopping, waving, hopping, stopping, and waving. Up over the hill, the rabbit's gone. He grabs the woman by the shoulders and says, my God, woman, what's in that can? It says, hairspray adds life and permanent wave. It's one of those jokes. You either laugh or you groan. There's a little ground to this.
Okay, I got one too.
Cool. What?
Not there.
Who's there?
Control freak. Okay, now you say control freak who?
By the way, that's the only clean joke I know. Would you like to hear another joke? No.
I'm curious from a technical perspective, we run into similar sorts of issues. Like, I just moved everything over to Linux, and 6 years ago or something,